is your gut giving you issues, and nothing you do is giving you the answers you need? And maybe you've looked at, doing food intolerances, maybe you've looked at doing some of the detoxes, maybe you've looked at adding different foods into your diet. There are a lot of different things that can be done for gut health, and today we're going to dive into one of the things that a lot of people miss on it. I'm Dr. Jeff Cumrow, and over the past 15 years, I've had the pleasure of working with thousands of people, ultimately helping to optimize their hardware and their software. We work to get their brain and their body optimized, and then we have to have those energetic systems to supply the brain and the body. That way, when we get put into a situation, whether that's a learning environment or a stressful situation or career or with your kids or whatever, you can pull the resources that you need to get the output that you want. So when we look at gut health, there are multiple factors that come into this. And gut health is, I don't know how to put this. It's very, very important because it's tied to everything. They call the gut the second brain, and the reason for that is it's tied to about everything. If you take a medication of any kind, there's a lot of times that you'll have gut issues that are the symptom of that, right? You'll either have constipation or diarrhea or indigestion or whatever that may be. And there's a big underlying factor in this, and that's what we're going to go into today. We're not going to dive into, the food intolerances, because that is something that I see a lot of people that they need the food intolerance testing. They need to change their diet. If you're eating your inflammation, it's hard to get rid of your inflammation. So something I highly recommend for anybody that's having gut issues. I see a lot of people that, are drinking too much coffee or taking in too much caffeine or different things like that. Again, looking at what is affecting it is important, but the underlying factors are what we really need to dive into, because if we don't dive into those underlying factors, we don't ever get over that. We're putting a Band-Aid on it, right? You're making dietary or lifestyle changes that are probably going to help you, but what's the underlying thing that is really holding you back? And there are two big things that we're going to go over today. The first one is Candida yeast. And Candida is just a type of yeast, and a lot of people get this into their system, and it gets there through food, it gets there through contact with other people, different things like that. And this yeast is something that is very, very, it's prolific. So if you have problems with it and you give it the right conditions, it's going to take off, and it can cause huge problems throughout your body. A lot of people look at yeast infections either in the urogenital system or in their mouth, but they don't look at them systemically. They don't look at them in your gut, and they play a huge role in your gut, because what the yeast will do is it forms tendrils. So it forms these little jaggedy looking things, and they come into your system and they hang there, right? The problem with this in the gut can be that if they get into your gut, you have your gut lining, and your gut lining is ultimately a couple of layers. And the way that it really, well, let's undo that. Let's look at something in a different way here. So the way that your gut lining really works is it's not really a consistent layer. It's more you have little dashes, and then you've got little spaces in there that things can get through. These would be things that allow certain proteins through. So it's kind of like a sieve, right? They allow things of a certain size to get through. And anytime that we have gut inflammation, these get expanded. So you have a bigger gap in here than what is currently here. That causes problems because things that shouldn't be getting through there end up getting through there. Now, where we can run into bigger problems with the yeast is the yeast comes through and it starts getting into the system and accessing the blood and all of those different things, and you start carrying it everywhere else, right? This causes inflammation. This starts to open up these fenestrations is what they're called. It makes the sieve bigger, so bigger proteins can get through and access your system. So it causes inflammation in that way. It causes irritation here. It causes an immune response. So we'll see things like celiac disease, ulcerative colitis, different things like that oftentimes have correlation with Candida yeast. So what is the first thing we have to do on that? We have to know if that's the issue. So there are lab tests that we can do that give us a pretty good idea of whether or not you have Candida yeast, what kinds of strains of Candida yeast you have, what kind of correlations those are going to have with your health, and different things like that. So that is the first thing that we want to look at as far as this. Now, when we look to get rid of Candida yeast, there are other things that we really have to look at. You can't just a lot of people will just try to detoxify things, and that doesn't necessarily work. We have to change our diet. We have to change some of our habits, our lifestyle as well, because if we don't do that, it tends to proliferate, right? And the big thing with this is simple carbs. Whether we're getting sugar, we're getting flour, we're getting all those refined carbs, it feeds this yeast. That yeast lives off those simple carbs. So when the conditions are right, this starts to blow up and you get more and more of this stuff coming in, and it dominates your system, right? The more tendrils you have, the more inflammation you have, the higher the immune response, and the more problems you end up having. Now, is it always correlated with autoimmunity? Not always. Like I said, sometimes it's just gut issues, sometimes you get thrush, sometimes you get recurrent infections. There's a lot of different ways that this can impact you, but this is one of the most important things that we need to rule out when we are doing this. So getting a clear board here. The other thing that we really have to look at is stress. When we stress, and this is a thing that a lot of people don't realize, when we stress, it has bigger implications on our system. And one of those is we turn down gut function, right? So we get under our stress and we start rampant. We focus on survival. And when we focus on survival, we increase our energetic capacity. So we increase our blood sugar. We increase our clotting capacity. So if we get cut, we don't bleed to death. We increase our blood pressure to supply those muscles. We increase muscle tightness in certain areas, more in the back of the legs and the front of the body, so we can either run or fight. We have all these systems that turn up, but we have to get the energy from somewhere. Our digestion turns down, our sexuality turns down, our healing and repairing turns down, because if we don't survive, we don't need those things, right? So we have these different things that start to happen within our body, but when we turn down that gut function, we turn down our acidity, right? And when we get decreased acid, better stop pressing that button. When we get that decreased acid in the system, what do we get? A lot of people say, you don't digest things. The problem is, what it looks like in here is when we get decreased acid, we end up getting indigestion. How does this happen? There are a couple of different things that happen. So ultimately, we have lower acid in our body. When we have lower acid in our body, we don't break things down as well as we should be. So food sits in our gut and it rots. And when we have that rotting, it creates lactic acid. So it's a different type of acid that starts to rise in our system. As we start to get lower acid in our system, we start to lose control of that upper sphincter in our stomach, and we start to release some of that acid up into the esophagus. So this is ultimately the cause of that. The indigestion, and we will ultimately need to work to increase the acid, which is strange. It's counter to what a lot of people will tell you on this. But as we start to increase that acid, we start to break down those foods. We start to close that sphincter up. We start to heal some of that area. And the benefit to this is as we start breaking foods down better, our gut doesn't have to work as much, and we get less inflammation in there as well. So it affects the whole system. But the underlying aspect to this is we can't just, you could take digestive enzymes and different things like that, and it's going to increase your acidity. It's going to help you break foods down and different things like that. But where we really get more bang for our buck is managing our stress in a better way. And we could do that in a multitude of ways. I have other videos that dive into that really, really well, where we talk about how you can really, affect your brain, what parts of the brain are impacted by that, and what we can do to really bring that forward. So if you're interested in diving in that further, check out one of those videos. For what it's worth on here, like I said, we need to work on controlling that a little bit. So breathing exercises are things that can work well. Getting the proper amount of sleep. Getting proper nutrition, right? So food intolerances definitely plays a role in both of these. It can increase the inflammation. It can increase that immune response. It can cause other issues. But when we look at food intolerances, what is the underlying reason? Because in most cases, you're not born with those food intolerances, right? If your relatives have them, it's a possibility you're going to be born with them, but in general, most people tolerate foods okay. It's just after time, they start to have more and more of an impact on our system. So we've got to get that calmed down. And this is the biggest thing. When we can decrease that stress, when we can get that acid level back up, when we can get that candida yeast under control, that's where a lot of gut issues kind of lie. And yes, like I said, changing your diet is something that's very, very important. Detoxes are things that can work very, very well if done properly. There are a lot of them that are not done properly, so just beware. You probably should work with a professional on that. It's something that depending on what type you do, there are dangers to it, and it's past the scope of this video to dive into that. So we're not going to dive into that right now, but really just work on improving your stress, because stress in general is the underlying factor in that. And like I said, I've got videos that better dive into that, but this is where I see a lot of gut issues underlying, right? People just have things going on, and until they can get their stress until they can get their stress handled, it's just very, very difficult to get rid of these. And there's some autoimmunities that are the same way. There's some, issues that people have with chronic infections and whatnot. We have to be able to get our body under control. And if we don't have that stress under control, if we're burning through more resources than we're able to provide, sooner or later we run out of resources and the body has to go into survival mode. So look at these things. If you have questions, obviously, reach out, drop me a message, drop me a comment. Either way, if this is helpful for you, like or subscribe. It gives me good information as far as what information is giving you the most benefit. And as always, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I know that those are two of your most valuable resources, and I appreciate you spending a little bit of it with me. So have a great week, and I'll catch you on next week's video.